Recording in progress.
Yeah. The open house meeting for the Climate Action Commission is officially adjourned. Can we please take a roll call vote?
Hatchley? Baker? Present. Administer? Ellicamp? Present. Gardy? Peters?
Present.
Fong? Hudson? Shribs.
Okay, this meeting is called to order because a majority of the Climate Action Commissioners are present as a Brown Act body. CAC members are not to congregate amongst ourselves to discuss CAC business. We are going to take part of the open house as individuals and members of the public. After the conclusion of the open house, the CAC and attendees from the public will relocate to the City Council chambers, where we will resume the CAC meeting of October 12th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m., at which point public comment for the open house will occur. Tonight's meeting will now recess until 6:30 p.m. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Like to call to order the regular meeting start time of the Thursday, October 12th Climate Action Commission. If we could take a roll call vote.
Hatchley?
Present.
Baker?
Present.
Administer?
Here.
Ellicamp?
Present.
Gardy?
Present.
Peters?
Here.
Fong? Hudson? Shribs.
Okay, the first item on tonight's agenda is general public comment. I have 3 yellow comment cards. If you would like to make a comment not about the blueprint, but about climate action in general, now would be your time to make a non-blueprint related comment. I will read the following statement and then invite the speakers up to present. During general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the City Council or Climate Action Commission's subject matter jurisdiction that are not listed on the current agenda. Public comments are limited up to 3 minutes per person. Depending on the number of persons wishing to address the Climate Action Commission, time will be allocated in equal shares totaling more than 20 minutes. The first speaker I have is Trevor Pitts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trevor Pitts. I'm an environmental chemist. Most of my career has been involved in issues regarding things that would affect humans, such as removing the mercury-containing spermicide from the market in 1973 because I had seen research to the effect that it could penetrate into the bloodstream. We're talking about the spermicide that was used with the diaphragm. Later than that, I finished up doing recycling of hazardous waste. So I'm an old-fashioned, early environmentalist. And so I try to concentrate my efforts in places where it will do the most good for the least effort and create the least side damage. And frankly, this plan does not meet that standard. I have a couple things here that I wanted to give you, but basically what they say, it has to do with the scale of the problem. Now, I've distributed some of these. The first thing we should see is that there's an exponential growth in the amount of CO2 being sent out by China. The United States is falling. The United Kingdom, actually my home place, has actually reached the level it was in 1880 at enormous cost. But the city of Petaluma, if it disappeared from the planet, would not make the smallest material difference to these measures. Another graph here, which I apologize for not being in color, shows that the energy consumption in 1980 was about 90% fossil fuels. Today it's around 83%. We are talking about a gigantic amount of energy that is produced from fossil fuels and will continue to be produced from fossil fuels for many decades to come. What we can do here is utterly immaterial, and yet it will do a lot of damage to our lives. When I first came to Petaluma, I noticed that there were no parking meters, that you could shop. There was all sorts of shops within 2 blocks. There was a hardware store. There were various offices of various kinds. So I accepted the offer I had been given for a real estate investment. And I loved Petaluma so much I moved in. But if you screw up the traffic to make it harder to people, if you put in parking meters, you will get a lot of resistance and you will damage the small businesses. If you follow this plan, it will cost a whole lot of money. It will interfere in people's lives. And just to quote this thing here, nearing our climate goal will require an almost complete transformation of our local economy and our community while strengthening the quality of life that makes Petaluma so exceptional. There's only one thing wrong with that story. It will not make our quality of life better. We will definitely screw up the economy. Now, in another part of this document, it says, striving for carbon neutrality, which, by the way, is impossible for this city, and which is in fact not attempting to do it. You're just attempting to reduce the greenhouse gas. Now, striving for carbon neutrality by 2030, 7 years from now, will require transformational change to the built environment, street network, and urban form, as well as a reimagining of daily life for Petalumans. I don't appreciate my daily life being reimagined.
Thank you, sir. That's time.
I don't appreciate the amount of money that's going to be spent on this. And I'd also like to know,
Sir, thank you for your comments. That's time.
did he save any greenhouse gas?
Sir, thank you for your
Mr.
comments.
Pitts,
That's
you will
time.
have the opportunity to comment during the agendized item. Thank you.
Comment when?
The blueprint is on the agenda for tonight's meeting. This is general public comment.
I really can't hear you.
You have the opportunity to make comments on the blueprint during the agendized portion of the meeting later tonight. Thank you.
I would like to remind the public that this is general public comment, and not for items on the agenda.
The next speaker card I have is for Steve DeLue.
I'm going to make a comment on the plan. Is that all right?
The comments for the plan will be happening during the public comment after the presentation on the plan. This time is for general public
Okay.
comment for items not listed on the agenda. Thank you.
The next speaker card I have is Richard Braun, excuse me.
Quick comment. Could you please speak directly into your microphone? Because I think I have trouble hearing as well. Okay. The display outside was lovely. Congratulations. I think we made a marvelous showing. Let's get serious. There's more to the blueprint than was on display. Much of the hard work will be rendered moot by $10 a gallon gasoline. Worldwide shortages of key raw materials will pile on, as
Sir?
in the 1990s.
Sir, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is, your comment is on the blueprint.
Okay,
The
okay.
blueprint. So that will be
Understand?
happening.
Can you switch me over to the other section? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker card I have is for Nina Zito.
And is this for the, a comment on the blueprint or a general public comment? Perfect, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nina Zito. Thank you. We should feel like we've accomplished so very much, and we have. And there's so much more we can do, and the opportunity rests in acknowledging the reality, the physics of noise, and how that contributes to the overall equation of warming. And we seem to have a conspicuous blindness to it because we hear with our ears, and people are not paying attention to the aggregating leaf blowers, backup beeps, pavers, earth movers, construction noise, ceaseless noise. The sounds of progress, perhaps, but they are part of the net energetics here. And if it's probably beyond the scope of this meeting to talk about thermodynamics, but just reacquainting oneself with kind of the math is probably a good idea here if we're going to be serious. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will like to also acknowledge there was a submitted comment by Stan Gold and Matt McGuire. So for those of you who read the online version, there was an additional comment as well. Moving on to the presentation item of agenda. If we could have the presentation, please. I guess, Rihanna, if you want to introduce this one and our speaker.
One moment, I just want to pull it on the screen. Perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. I would like to introduce to you Eric, who is the lead consultant for Ramey and Associates, that will be speaking about the public draft of the blueprint for carbon neutrality this evening. As all of you here know, Petaluma has ambitious goals to be carbon neutral by 2030, and this is going to be only successful if we come together as a city and a community, each and every one of us, and work together to achieve these goals.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Thanks. It's really exciting to be here tonight on the back of the community open house that we had on the release of the blueprint for carbon neutrality. My name is Eric Yurkovich. I'm a principal at Ramey and Associates. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Sammy Taylor, who's wrapping up the open house outside, but will be in later this evening to answer questions if you have them this evening as well. Tonight I'm here to talk a little bit about the blueprint process, about the technical analysis that was done as part of that process, and then the action plans themselves that are really the core foundation of helping Petaluma reach its carbon neutrality goal. I'm going to talk a little bit about those blueprints, but then I'll really focus on the kind of the 22 cornerstone actions that are part of the plan itself. The blueprint for carbon neutrality represents the city's program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It aims to really implement that shared vision for climate action that was developed as part of the climate emergency framework. It builds on the past work that's been done by City Council, the Climate Action Commission, and the ad hocs, as well as ongoing planning processes like the Active Transportation Plan, the General Plan, and other plans as well. The blueprint is really a short-term implementation plan. So you're thinking 5 to 10 years out into the future, tied to that, the city's carbon neutrality goal at 2030. We also built in ongoing monitoring and adjustment. That's part of the plan and the updates to that plan because it's kind of an active and dynamic process moving forward. The plan was released on October 7th, and public comments are open until October the 28th. In climate planning, we really often focus on these two kind of overlapping policy approaches: reducing our contribution to climate change by lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and then adapting to the potential impacts of climate change. The blueprint itself really focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Concurrent with the blueprint process, the city's been working to develop policy alternatives to adapt to climate change. So I think you all received a presentation, I think last month, on the updated sea level rise and flooding maps that the city's been working on to really understand the conditions between flooding, sea level rise, and the Petaluma River into the future. So part of the general plan process will be to develop a series of policies and implementation actions to address climate adaptation within that document. And given the timing of those two efforts, we kind of separated the two, and so the blueprint really focuses on greenhouse gas reduction so we can move that piece forward more quickly. This on your screen is a simplified version of the process overall. We've started by creating a greenhouse gas inventory for the community, but also for city operations and facilities. We then conducted a series of greenhouse gas reduction analysis where we packaged a series of strategies and actions together and looked at their benefit from a greenhouse gas perspective, thought about their co-benefits as well. And then we worked to create a series of greenhouse gas reduction action plans, which we workshopped with the city staff, city leadership team, as well as the CAC ad hoc groups. We took feedback from all those meetings, and all of that has been incorporated into the blueprint for public review now. So during the development of the blueprint, we had several touchstones with the Climate Action Commission and its ad hocs, where we talked about the process, discussed the results of the technical analysis, and then kind of provided that overview and discussion around those different action plans within the blueprint. Those yielded a ton of different comments, so we're not going to get into them specifically tonight, but a lot of changes were made to those action plans based on the comments from ad hoc members as well as CAC members after those meetings. I think it's always important to begin at the beginning. The city has done a lot of work already on climate planning. And through the climate emergency process, you worked hard to define a vision and values for what you hope to achieve as a community by reducing emissions in line with that 2030 target. I always like to start with the vision because it really does articulate what we're trying to achieve and the breadth of what we're trying to achieve as a group and as a community. As we start to think about that, it's important to understand where we are now. So how do we currently contribute to greenhouse gas emissions within the city? So as I mentioned, we conducted a greenhouse gas inventory for the city using 2018 data. The emissions inventory totaled over 470,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. At the time in 2018. As you can see in the chart, most of the emissions, 2/3 of them, are in the transportation sector, and about 1/4 of them are energy. So they're really concentrated in a handful of sectors overall. We also looked at the trend. So how has the emissions profile changed for the city between 2010 and 2018, where we had inventory data to look at those past trends. And while beginning in adding Petaluma into Sonoma Clean Power, you can see that emissions from energy use and from water use reduced quite significantly during that time frame. At the same time, you see increases in transportation-related emissions and also solid waste emissions. On the transportation side, it's because the model got better in those intervening years, and so it wasn't quite apples to apples. And then on the solid waste side, the Redwood landfill started processing methane differently, so it was an increase in emissions there. Next slide. We also looked at municipal operations emissions, and we quantified those for 2019. And there are 3,600 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is a little bit less than 1% of the overall community inventory. And you can see primarily these, again, are in the transportation sector, so the vehicle fleet, employee commute. So those kind of mirror the overall community-wide emissions profile. So now we're going to take a few minutes just to talk about the structure and organization of the blueprint itself. So the blueprint's really organized into these 6 chapters with a series of technical appendices. Most of our work and discussion tonight is going to be focused on that chapter 5, those greenhouse gas action plans. Next. So really foundational to the implementation of the blueprint itself is an equity-focused implementation. So we believe equity can be implemented through kind of 3 specific kinds of ways. One is to make sure that the process is fair, transparent, and inclusive as you implement programs moving forward. Second, we want to make sure to distribute resources equitably across priority communities, really focusing on those communities who are most likely to be harmed by the climate impacts. And third, we want to make sure to address any underlying structural issues which make it hard for people to adapt and to take on these new greenhouse gas mitigation measures overall. So those equity considerations are integrated directly into the blueprint themselves, but we've also developed a series of tools for the city as you start to really implement each and every one of these programs moving forward, including an equity toolkit and checklist to guide program implementation. And then also, we can go to the next slide, an analysis of the most disadvantaged areas within the city of Petaluma. Now, these equity priority areas were developed as part of the general plan update process, and these are areas within the city that have kind of a confluence of lower health equity outcomes, environmental justice considerations, as well as social disadvantage. So these are some of the neighborhoods as you implement different programs, you should be thinking about how you can target resources in those priority areas. So as defined in the climate emergency framework, we want to try to get to carbon neutrality by 2030. So part of our process was to look at what it would take to get there. We looked at emission reductions in these primary 7 sectors, which largely correspond to the sectors within your greenhouse gas inventory. So buildings and energy use, land use and transportation, resource consumption, water, sequestration, and then municipal operations. So what we did was we forecasted out emissions into the future. So we did 2 without local action. The first is the business as usual scenario. It just kind of straight lines emissions out into the future, assuming no state and local policy. It's not a very likely scenario. The second is the adjusted business as usual scenario. So this straight lines those emissions out, but then adjusts for state and federal policy. That's the things that are on the books now that are going to drop our emissions independent of what local jurisdictions do. And then we created 2 additional climate action scenarios. The first is the ambitious climate action scenario. And this was really developed to coincide with the action plans itself within the blueprint. And this illustrates that state action as well as the implementation of local measures to reduce emissions. And then the fourth scenario is the kind of the what does it take. So we wanted to look at we want to see what it would take for the city to get to zero by 2030. What does that mean in terms of implementation? How far would you have to turn the levers of policy to make that happen? So that's the kind of the fourth, or the what does it take scenario. So those different climate action scenarios are illustrated on the screen now. Those include both those business as usual, adjusted business as usual, as well as the ambitious and the what does it take scenario. So that ambitious climate action scenario really models, again, the Blueprint's action plans. It includes mandatory building and energy upgrades, a significant increase in electric vehicle, and an increase in active modes of transportation. That scenario drops emissions by over 250,000 metric tons of CO2e by 2030. That's an over 50% reduction from your 1990 levels. You can see that even though you take those ambitious steps, there's still a gap to fill to get to that target of carbon neutrality by 2030. So you might ask, well, what's the difference? Why can't we just ratchet up the Blueprint to get to that carbon neutrality goal with that what does it take scenario? So this slide is intended to sort of simply illustrate what the difference is between the two. So on the left-hand side, you have ambitious climate action, and on the right-hand side, the kind of the what does it take scenario. So in this case, the ambitious scenario electrifies 40% of the buildings. It models that 25% of all vehicles in the city are electric, and that 50% of all trips are taken by active modes of travel by 2030. Whereas the what does it take scenario models 85% of all buildings are electrified, 25% electric vehicles, and a 75% mode share. Now you could adjust and you could have a higher EV rate and a lower mode share. Either way, you could adjust those variables, but this kind of illustrates overall the challenge of getting to those numbers. So the next couple of slides sort of further kind of articulate what that looks like. So what does it mean to electrify 40 to 85% of the housing units, just the housing units alone within the city? That would be 1,000 to about 2,500 housing units every year to meet that target. Likewise, you'd be electrifying about 1,000 new cars each year to get to that target, to get to that 25% EV adoption rate. So city staff asked us to just give an estimate of what the relative costs would be for individuals within the community to kind of meet these targets. So based on an analysis of both high and low cost scenarios for single family and multifamily housing, retrofitting those units could cost somewhere in the order of $14 million to $32 million. Note that doesn't include subsidies and rebates, which are widely available and readily available to homeowners and businesses, which would draw down that cost overall. Those are for things like panel upgrades, HVAC systems, and more that are already available through Sonoma Clean Power, through the state, through the federal government already. And so those incentive programs would reduce that overall cost. They also have the added benefit of yielding public health benefits, which aren't really quantified as part of this, or the operations of those buildings as well. So what would it cost to purchase EVs at that rate? So similarly, the costs in EVs vary broadly from $30,000 to well over $100,000 per electric vehicle, with the average last year being about $50,000 per electric vehicle. So adding about 1,000 new vehicles a year, you're looking at a range of $31 million to $51 million. Again, that's independent of the incentives and rebates that are readily available through those utilities, through the state and federal government to help reduce those costs, as well as the public health benefits that would be accrued through that implementation. And then finally, a 50% mode split is really complicated to think about and really complicated to understand, but it means that half the trips are taken by not driving. So half the vehicle miles or the miles that you travel are taken by non-auto modes, walking, biking, scooting, or transit use. So that an example of what that looks like in real life is North Beach and in Chinatown in San Francisco. Their mode split is about 50% mode share. So there you have a dense urban environment with lots of high quality transit and pretty good pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure. So recognizing all those challenges, understanding staff capacity, technological adoption rates, as well as slower implementation timelines from the state and federal government. We set up a reduction process that recognizes those challenges, but that still aims to keep you on that target and continually reevaluating and moving towards that target. So we start by implementing a series of foundational actions that will set the city up for future success. So developing financing mechanisms for existing buildings, electrification, adopting EV charger reach codes, and then finishing things like the general plan are kind of core to those foundational items. Then we aim to focus on urban transformation projects, building out your active transportation plan, investing in all electric transit facilities, working to sequester carbon in the environment through tree planting and open space preservation, all the while implementing a more rigorous monitoring, reporting, and adjustment process so that in 2 years and 3 years, you can make adjustments and understand what's working, what's not working, and how you can continually turn those policy levers. Towards the latter half of the decade, it's really about expanding those decarbonization programs, moving from voluntary programs and incentive-based programs to mandatory programs with real financial mechanisms to help property owners and individuals and businesses make those changes. And then all the while kind of maintaining that focus on an equitable implementation. So that approach is really implemented through a series of greenhouse gas reduction plans, and that's really the meat of the blueprint for carbon neutrality. Go to the next slide. So those action plans are kind of spread across all of these different sectors. And we're not going to get into all the details of this tonight, but this illustrates kind of the array of strategies and actions which are embedded in the blueprint itself. This table also just kind of helps to synthesize the breadth of all of those actions, the priority actions, as well as those partnership opportunities. We had a lot of discussions in the foyer about how can I help, how can I be involved, what are the partnerships with cool blocks and cool neighborhoods that really can further this. So this gets an illustration of where those partnership actions are, and it illustrates some of that, what the potential greenhouse gas reduction is from those plans overall. The next one shows the breakdown of where you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. So those are things like maintaining the city within Sonoma Clean Power, making sure that residents have access to 100% renewable energy. It's going to be electrifying or removing as much of the natural gas out of existing buildings as possible. It's going to be electrifying your vehicle fleets, and then focusing on clean transportation modes, active transportation, transportation demand management. Those are some of the biggest ones on your community-wide side. Within your city side and your municipal operations, you're looking at vehicle fleets and buses, transportation demand management for staff and consultants who work within the city, as well as retrofitting existing buildings. Now, this gives a sense of the relative costs because each of those measures aren't equivalent in terms of cost, but this allows you to kind of see the relative cost of different types of actions within the plan itself. And again, there's a lot of overlap here between some of those sets of measures or strategies and their greenhouse gas reduction potential. So things like existing buildings and vehicle electrification have high costs, but they also have very high benefits for the community, as we sort of talked about earlier. All right, so fundamental to the plan itself was what we call the cornerstone actions, or the kind of the priority actions. So through extensive conversations with city staff and the leadership team there, we identified these 22 priority actions to really jumpstart the emission reductions. So these strategies align with council priorities. They generate significant reductions as well as co-benefits, and are sort of foundational actions that help prepare the city to implement additional actions within the future. And then the next handful of slides is really going to highlight what those 22 priorities are. So the first 4 focus on new and existing buildings. The first is establishing a center for a one-stop shop for resources on electrification, but also other educational resources about rebates, financing, how can people improve their homes to reduce their footprint. The second comes from our initial conversations with you all about the development of a financing mechanism to support building electrification, making sure that there are resources to help fund and fill the gap for both low-income households, but other members of Petaluma to make these changes to their homes. The next actions focus on implementing a date certain electrification strategy, and then a policy that phases in requirements for new development for low embodied carbon materials. So those are things like recycled materials or using different kinds of concrete that have lower emissions profiles. The next set of actions really focuses on transportation and land use. So these include adopting a transportation demand management ordinance to reduce vehicle miles traveled, also implementing the city's vehicle miles traveled impact fee, and as well as the EV charging reach code, and then completing and implementing the active transportation plan as well as the local safety plan to provide those opportunities and spaces for safe and comfortable travel around the city. Finishing and implementing the general plan, land use strategies, and then also starting to implement parking pricing policies and programs around the city as well. Next, we also have expanding reliable charging infrastructure. That's a big focus now at the state level and where there are funding opportunities, as well as reforming your zoning and permitting to allow development in the places where you want it to happen. The next set of cornerstone actions focus on resource consumption. And we wanted to include just a little bit of levity within the presentation. It's pretty dense. It's a lot of material. But we can really assume that bucket is filled with blueberries and that Sal and her mother are somewhere nearby with their buckets as well. But these strategies really focus on resource consumption. They include requiring enclosures for new multifamily and non-residential development. It also includes continued work with Cool Petaluma to really understand consumptive-based emissions here within the community, what those emissions are, that profile is, and really tabulating and estimating those emissions locally. And then it includes continued partnering with Recology and Zero Waste Sonoma on food waste and food diversion programs. The next set of cornerstone actions focuses on sequestration, including finishing the revised tree preservation ordinance, revising the urban forest plan with that clear implementation strategy, and then working on a comprehensive land management plan for city-owned properties. So how does the city manage the properties, both for greenhouse gas reduction benefits, but also for biodiversity benefits as well? And then finally, the last set of actions focuses on municipal operations. These include things like electrifying the transit and vehicle fleet here within the city, finishing facility audits and electrifying facilities themselves, making sure that your capital improvement plan really aligns with your carbon neutrality goal, that you're not spending money in ways that further increase emissions. And then finally, increasing and upgrading your corp yard to meet your electrification needs of your transit fleet and your facilities. Go to the next one. All right, so that was a lot, I realize. But before we hand it back to you, we want to let you all know and the community know what's happening next in the process. So there are a number of ways that individuals can provide comments to the project team on the blueprint itself. So you can write a letter to planpetaluma@cityofpetaluma.org. You may go, there's through the planpetaluma.org website, there's a portion of the site devoted to the blueprint. On that site, you can go and complete an online form if you have a longer comments to provide. All those comments are due by October 28th. Next steps in the process. So once the comment period closes, what we'll do as a team is consolidate all the comments we got, both here at the commission, also members of the community who send comment letters or fill out the online feedback form, or who provided comments to us in the foyer this evening. We'll tabulate all of those comments into one really long table. We'll organize those comments by sector or action plan, depending on what those comments start to look like. And then we'll start to go through those with city staff to make decisions about what their changes will be to the blueprint moving forward. The intent is to come back to boards and commissions later on this year in December with council consideration early in 2024. So I want to just thank everyone. It was a long presentation. It was pretty dense, but hopefully the overview is helpful for you all as well as members of the community who are here this evening. So thanks.
Thank you so much. So at this point, Eric, if you'd be available for a couple questions from the commission members. So typically we do a brief round of clarifying questions on the presentation. Then we do a round of public comment on the presentation, and then we do commission member feedback. And that would be when you would provide detailed feedback on the blueprint and your initial thoughts, et cetera. So we'll start with just the first round of commission member questions and, try and avoid detailed comments as much as possible. And then we'll do general public comment. So I guess I'll start at my right. Dave, if you have any questions? No? Okay. Questions? Okay. Ann?
So I have a process question, which is the public hearing 3A item. Receive presentation, provide initial feedback, questions for staff, determine next steps for commission review, et cetera. But then including creation of an ad hoc subcommittee to draft recommendations. And then 3B is discuss action recommended by staff to create a specialized ad hoc. So we've got a little overlap here between 3A and 3B. And I'm also wondering if it might not be more efficient to take public comments and then talk about process. I'm a little confused about the process piece of this, because I think that if we create an ad hoc, which makes eminently good sense to me, then we're going to have ample opportunity to dig in more detail than we could possibly do tonight, whereas this is really the public's only opportunity in this type of forum. So I'm just wondering if it, since we will have this other opportunity, and, frankly, I could take several hours to just share my comments so far, and I haven't even really finished. That doesn't seem like a very sensible thing for me personally to do. And I imagine each of you probably also has voluminous comments. So just wondering if we can make any fine tuning to this process this evening.
Could I make a suggestion? I think it makes sense for the commission tonight to really give high-level comments, just on the overall format, to the extent to which any big items were not included, our confidence level in the cornerstone actions, for example, and the approach of the cornerstone actions. So really kind of take a big picture series of comments, how close did it align with the framework, for example? Let the public speak, and then, what you said, Ann, really dig into the details in the ad hoc process and in our next meeting. That we would really then the ad hoc would redline a document with, edits small and large, and bring it back to the commission, and the commission would have a chance to look at it for, several days at least before the meeting.
Seems like everyone is aligned with that approach. Great, okay. So I did have just a couple clarifying questions before we moved into general public comment. In the inventories, so the community inventory and then the municipal inventory, I noticed that the airport contribution was 0% at the city level, which makes sense because the city isn't flying airplanes, but the off-road transportation part of the community GHG, I'm curious what the percentage of the airport contribution is to that number, because the city does own the airport, does sell the fuel at the airport, and so if that is a meaningful contribution, then that is an action that the city could take in its control.
That's a great question. And you're talking specifically about fuel use on site as opposed to people flying in and out, which would be captured under a different regulatory structure and system. That's a great question. There are data sets when we developed the municipal inventory that were not readily available to us, and that was one of those data sets. So part of our recommendations through that process was revising and working and developing those data pipelines. So each inventory going forward would have that full set of emissions inventory. So we're not sure if that's a large amount of emissions. It's probably a fairly small amount of emissions overall. But those are kind of some of the next steps for the city in terms of developing those data pipelines.
Okay, thanks. And I guess my only other question is just the number 22 on Cornerstone Actions. Is that a magic number? If we really love a 23rd Cornerstone Action, is that on the table? What is the feeling in terms of the Cornerstone Actions?
I'm not sure if this is for me to answer, really. It is. I don't think there's a magic number necessarily. We want to make that number achievable, so we don't want it to be 50, but we want to make sure that those actions are meaningful and that city staff are able to take those on. So I don't think it's a hard and fast rule that it's 22. Okay, great. Thanks again. So at this point,
I got a question.
yeah. Oh, okay.
My question is, when you showed the cost numbers for replacing vehicles with electric vehicles and also for electrifying buildings, are those cost numbers based on the actual cost of the electric vehicle, or are they based on the cost of the electric vehicle over and above what it would cost to buy a gas vehicle?
Those would be the new purchase price for a vehicle.
Okay, but I think it might be more helpful to actually show the delta.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually probably really important with the electrification of buildings as well, because, everyone's hot water heater is going to die at some point, and they are going to need to replace it. So I'd like to see those numbers look at what the delta is moving to electrification. And the information that we have, for example, from Zero Home is that everyone immediately starts making money on replacing their hot water heater with an electric hot water heater. So it'd be nice to kind of, have that be more realistic to the cost. I think that would help people organize their mind around making some of these changes.
Great, thanks.
I'll just add to that when we were looking at the EV cost analysis, it didn't include the cost savings that happens with ownership, not having to pay for gas or oil changes, that kind of thing.
Can I pile on there? It also assumed a purchase of new vehicles, and not everyone purchases new vehicles, and the market for used EVs is growing every year.
Okay, great. At this point, we're going to move into the general comment item for this agenda. And so I do have a nice stack of speaker cards here. People are limited to 3 minutes. And so we will try and honor that commitment.
I thought there were going to be questions from the floor.
The opportunity to ask questions is the purview of the Climate Action Commission.
I just thought you said.
The first speaker we have is Deb Fox.
And I would like to take note that our timer is not functioning, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to see a timer on the screen for public comment.
Hi. All right, I'll want to say thank you for this plan. I'm excited to see this implemented. I have two main things that I want to make sure are part of the comment is one, would really appreciate having a longer public comment beyond October 28th. It's really important that the public is able to really understand what this document means, the importance of it. So I would really like to advocate for a longer extension on that process. The second one is I really want to emphasize adding a number 23, and that number 23 that is listed as a low priority is about the organizational structure. We have to make sure that those staff positions are funded first and foremost starting January 1 of 2024. It's not a, hopefully that can happen piece. It needs to be the highest priority that staff in every department is a part of this green team, because that's the only way this whole thing is going to work, is that we have staff that are educated, involved, and communicating together to implement the plans on the inside so that all of the organizations on the outside can be doing a cohesive, as I like to cite Peggy, the wind and the sail. The only way that wind is going to have some sail, or sail is going to have some wind, is if everybody is working together. But I really need to emphasize the importance of having staff in every single department that are part of a regular meeting, helping to implement each of the action plans, both for the city and for the community participation. Thank you.
The next speaker card I have is Pete Gang, followed by Natasha Juliana.
Good evening, and thank you. I just jotted down a number of random comments, many of which came to me today when I was reading through this document. So they're not in order. Here goes. One observation is throughout the document, the words climate change sound so neutral. In many circles, we prefer to use climate crisis because what's happening is actually an existential crisis, and it's not neutral at all. I wonder why the effort did not use more recent greenhouse gas data. I know RCPA has compiled 2020 data. To me, the report it does not seem well grounded in climate science. It makes very short mention of the climate science that is propelling us to take bold and immediate action. There's no mention of what we mean by greenhouse gases, no mention of methane, F-gases, etc. One missing cornerstone action is complete streets. Per the advice of CityThread, we need to build our complete mobility network starting immediately. They set as a goal 25 miles of our complete network by 2026. Also, I wanted to point out that many other national and subnational jurisdictions around the world have also set the wildly ambitious target date for carbon neutrality of 2030, including 4 other cities in Sonoma County. And yes, it's a huge challenge. Per the vision in the framework, I would suggest that we as Petaluma maintain our bold, audacious goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. We set our sights on it, and we just make it a point to do everything that we have to do to reach that goal, including finding the necessary funding. In that way, we would be a leader to all of Sonoma County and to the rest of the country. And finally, my overall question is, what would the timeline look like if this were an actual emergency? Thank you.
The next speaker I have is Natasha Juliana, followed by Trayton Heckman.
Hi, I'm Natasha Juliana. I am the campaign director for Cool Petaluma. I'm also a parent of a 19-year-old and a downtown business owner. What I love about the 2030 goal, which I know is audacious, but it doesn't allow us to keep kicking the can down the road, which is so easy because our brain just doesn't really work with long time frames, which works against us in this situation. I'm personally very excited to live into a new climate neutral future. There are so many co-benefits that I look forward to: cleaner air, cleaner water, quieter neighborhoods, safer streets, healthier homes, healthier ecosystems, more nature, more beauty. And I am, this change towards a more sustainable future does not scare me. For example, I love cooking on my induction stove. It's better than gas. And I don't have to worry about carbon monoxide poisoning like the 12 Petalumans who ended up in the hospital 2 weeks ago because of a faulty gas range in their apartment. However, I am extremely terrified of a future that is just business as usual, where we don't take action. We have 8 billion people living on a finite planet. We cannot keep consuming and polluting like there is no end. My daughter will be my age in 2055. What will that world look like for her? What will the river look like as the sea levels come up? What will our skies look like as the fires continue? My future grandchildren could be my age in 2085. What will their world look like? I want to do my part to ensure they have the same beautiful planet that I've enjoyed, that we've all enjoyed, and I look forward to helping make this blueprint a reality. Thank you.
The next speaker we have is Trayton Heckman, followed by Maddie Cloud.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you. Feels exciting, another kind of important moment we're at, and I appreciate all the incredible work that was gone into the blueprint. So first, gratitude. Second, I want to back Deb's comment about an extended time frame. The original climate framework was created by the community with the commission through a lot of really good organizing. It really tapped the wisdom of our community. I think there's a good base of work that's done here. And with some more time, we could better bring the community's voice and wisdom and some of the things that are missing to this. So that's a primary comment. I definitely understand the heavy focus on carbon neutrality in this. It's a major goal for the city. Just want to note that water is often seen as the 1% of emissions for GHG. Water is life. Water creates food, health, community sequestration, habitat. And so there's a lot more ways water could be represented in this, I think, importantly. Community engagement. In the original climate framework, it was called for some creative ways to do engagement, like creating a Petaluma Equitable Climate Action Network. We really have to invest in the social infrastructure. There's only so far that organizations and volunteers can do. We have to have more robust funded backbone community engagement to really utilize and engage the community's voice. The approach to priority actions, I heard Councilmember Baker mention. I'd be interested in hearing what the thinking was for how the 22 actions were selected. Things that build engagement and build community momentum. 2030 is a big goal, and there's a lot that we have to do. So I'd be curious to hear what the approach was there, and would maybe come up with some different actions pending that. And then gardens. There's in the original framework, there was a section about creating a climate victory garden movement. In World War II, is it, I guess, we grew about 40% of our food in victory gardens. And that addresses health, that addresses water, that addresses climate. And just in our neighborhood, the Kavanaugh Center Food Forest that the city helped install in our garden sequester 2 tons and 1 ton of carbon a year while growing a lot of food, while having very low water use, creating habitat, creating community. If we had every household in our neighborhood had that sequestration on these very small lots, it's 20 tons just in one neighborhood. Our garden is the equivalent on a 1/7 of an acre of 20 mature oak trees about. So there's a lot that could be done around gardens. I think that's a missing piece. And same thing with compost, some good ways to enhance the good work that's already there in the sequestration section. And I think that covers it. So thank you very much.
The next speaker I have is Maddie Cloud, followed by Dwayne Bellinger.
Thank you very much. This was great. I love the blueprint. My name is Maddie Cloud. I'm a Petaluma City School board trustee. And I'm here because I'm kind of a plea to work with the schools and to think about the schools when completing this blueprint. We have over 7,000 students and families in Petaluma City Schools. They're all dropping off and picking up their children, or they're driving themselves every day, twice a day. And I think everybody in this room knows that every school has an impact with that dropping off and picking up, which unfortunately our schools can't deal with. So I just don't see anything about the transportation impacts of that daily picking up and of our students. We have 17 school sites just in Petaluma City Schools. We also have Old Adobe and WAS schools over on the west side. They have the same issues that we do. So with obvious impacts, these all need to be mitigated in some way. And I'd like to see it in the blueprint specifically. I'm asking that the city work with the district. I'm a school board member. This is part of what it's a passion of mine, to create the safe streets and safe routes to schools that aims to reduce the use of cars as transportation. Bus routes, bike paths, slow streets, lighted crosswalks, quick builds to slow traffic on main streets. So many others. These are ones I just thought up as I was sitting there. I'd like to see many of these, or as many as possible, implemented to make our schools safe for our families to bring their students and not have to worry. At least have options that are a lot safer than what we have right now. And now we have so many cars dropping off and picking up because they don't feel safe on the streets. So thank you very much for listening.
The next speaker is Dwayne Bellinger, followed by Dennis Best.
Yes, it's Dwayne here. Good evening. Thank you for all your work on this project so far. The previous speaker mentioned WAS School, among others. I would point out that WAS School was deliberately designed with two small schools, 440 students each, was designed to be within walkable distance of the old Corona Eli program, the northern city, and that the houses are within walking distance by children. They're all within walking distance. It was deliberately designed that way, not by accident. And the problem comes about, and there's quite a bit of problem of people parking in front of the schools and running their engines while they're waiting to pick up kids. The primary problem is the speed limit in the city. There's no reason, if Paris can't go to 18 miles an hour, there's no reason we can't go to 18 miles an hour. And if Sacramento says no, put up the sign that says 18 miles an hour and enforce it. Let Sacramento take us to court. The major problem that we have in this country is that in the 1950s, we decided we'd subsidize cars massively. Every time we turn around, we come up with a new subsidy for cars. Why do we spend property tax money on cars? Why do we spend sales tax money on cars? Why do we subsidize the medical cost of cars, the health costs from the lead tetraethyl that probably is result for significant number of our people being in jail, the lead tetraethyl, breathing the fumes of cars throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The health subsidized, the medical cost subsidies to cars is enormous. Stop the subsidies. Subsidies have effect. Just stop the subsidies immediately. No property taxes spent on subsidizing cars. No sales tax on subsidizing cars. What would we have if we did that? We would have cars paid for entirely by the gas tax. I've driven in Europe. The gas tax there was $4 a gallon, and it meant that the gas companies only got $2. We got $5 here. How much is going to sales tax and how much are going to gas tax and how much of the gas company's taking? It's because Sacramento and Washington are owned by big oil. Stop subsidizing oil, stop subsidizing cars. Do this tomorrow. Change our speed limit tomorrow. We don't have to, it's a great plan. 5 years, 10 years. Do it tomorrow. Thank you very much.
The next speaker I have is Dennis Best, followed by Trevor Pitts.
Good evening. I'm Dennis. Buenas noches a todos. My comment is mainly about bilingualism, multilingualism, and many of the things we see there about our vision for these activities. I think it's important from an organizational perspective, thinking about staff, consultants, thinking about the process of engagement, thinking about the process of communications, that we think early on about bilingualism, thinking about making things accessible, thinking about engaging people where they are, bringing people into these discussions. The motivation for me coming tonight was I saw in the advertisement for the Caulfield Bridge Initiative, one of the comments, and this is a concrete suggestion, was that bilingual interpretation would be available on request. And I think that we need to think seriously as a city about just making it a matter of fact so that we can have that accessibility when people decide to show up and express themselves para expresar en la lengua que pueden usar. And I think that this is a very important part of our climate action activities, but also broader activities within commissions and planning across the board. Thank you very much for the time. Muchas gracias, and have a good evening.
Well, I'd like to address some practicalities. 7 years ago, the city of Richmond had a similar plan to this one set up by the Ramey people. It would be of interest for the committee to find out just what the results have been in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. And talking about other consultancies, we had a consultancy that sold us on the so-called SMART train. Now, if you were thinking of a complete failure of trying to reduce greenhouse gas and trying to reduce traffic, then the so-called SMART train is probably the best example in the world. It's costing right now upwards of $500,000. $500 million. So it's $500 million. Now, what could you do with $500 million in some other way to reduce traffic volume and problems? And other greenhouse gas reductions, it's almost impossible to imagine a bigger failure in those terms. So I think we should be really careful about complicated projects that might turn out to be not very effective. We're talking about public transportation, which is extremely difficult to get people converted to. Our buses run probably 90% empty most of the time. They weigh, 5 or 10 tons each? That silly train weighs about 50 or 60 tons and has 4 or 5 people in it when most of the time I see it. If we really think that we can revolutionize the way people move around this town, then I think you have a real problem that's going to build up. Right now, public transport in New York City is in a disastrous state. People are simply not taking the subways and the public transport in the way they used to do. It's a huge problem all over the country to get a public transport system to work. Something like a jitney system might work. It certainly would work a lot better than our buses, or even self-driving cars that you just call up. Almost anything would work better than what we have now as a heritage. Electric buses are unbelievably expensive, and if the Chinese ones are any guide, they're not very durable and they have a tendency to burst into flames. And by the way, as an environmental chemist, I can tell you that putting out a fire in an electric vehicle it's not a fire, it's a runaway reaction that feeds on its own heat. Sometimes the only way you can put the fire out is to dump the car in a pond or a canal. That's the only way. And sometimes it reignites. So we have serious problems here. And as a recycler of hazardous waste, I can tell you that recycling these used batteries is a nightmare. They contain 20% of the energy in them left when they're so-called dead. That energy is
Thank
enough
you,
to
sir.
blow
That's
you
time.
out the window. And it means that you're dealing with highly active substances.
Thank
I
you,
should
Mr.
know
Pitts.
because I used to deal
Thank
with
you.
them. I had to incinerate
Sir?
lithium components.
Thank you.
It
That's
was
your
not
time.
easy. It cost a fortune. Fortunately, they paid me.
The next speaker I have is Nina Zito, followed by Ned Orrit.
Hi, I'm troubled by the lack of specificity in this very bold plan. There are an awful lot of assumptions made, and maybe there are clear definitions that specify what these outcomes are. When I get nervous when somebody else says, oh, well, we're going to make some foundational assumptions and we're going to do some prioritizing and we're going to base our visioning on this, which then becomes enunciated into policy and mutates into tactics, and then a strategy is achieved. Well, I'm troubled by a strategy for climate change in the midst of a climate crisis that requires more building, more construction, more noise, more expense, more money, more pollution. The fact is, from a physics standpoint, for things to cool off, it has to be a reductive process. This whole process hasn't addressed the mitigations by choice. They're just going to, we're just going to take the carbon down. What if that assumption is not enough? I challenge us to look more closely at some of the assumptions that are bandied about a little cavalierly, at least a little too cavalierly for my comfort in this document. Thank you.
Ned Orrit, followed by Matt Semenke.
Good evening, Commission. First, I thank you for the work going ahead that has been put in for years on this, and now we're getting farther along. So the thing that came out to me in reading the draft report has to do, it was about carbon neutrality, but neutrality from what? Obviously, the target is 0 by a certain date, and hopefully beyond that, we're going to go to negative 120 or something to get to pre-industrial conditions. But net zero of what? Where are we starting from? And we know that our unit emissions in America, or certainly in California, about 20 tons per person per year. So overall, that's mostly and the world average is about 4. So the difference is all the goods and services that we're consuming, the emissions embedded in those are enormous. And they were sketched out a little bit in the plan, but not the starting point for the emission reduction that we need to do. So there's another about 800,000 metric tons of carbon per year that petalumens are responsible for. So how to deal with that? So we've got to get creative to go there, and I think we can really take some leadership in doing that. The basic method we've used so far in this county is carbon sequestration in soil. And to reduce that extra 800,000 metric tons, which we're responsible for, would take about 40,000 acres of rangeland on which we could put compost every year for 20 years, and that would knock it out. That's just one way. And the whole county should be doing that. That would be tremendous leadership. And while we're doing that, we're restoring the health in the soil, which is really important because our health is dependent on the health of everything else living in the biosphere. So we've got to help restore life throughout the planet. That would be a good way to do it, and it would get us started toward regenerative agriculture. So it was mentioned in the report that local food production would be good, but it has to, if it's not grown regeneratively, we're not helping ourselves. Then we have to look at the transportation linkage, food processing, grocery stores, that was mentioned in the report. and so forth. But that way, we start making a big difference. It would make things helpful. And then fiber is another area we can work on. We're lucky to have Fibershed Group near us. That's enough blabbing for now, but I really appreciate the work we started, and I'm going to submit some more details that I can't talk about here. There's too many details. Thank you.
Matt, appreciate butchering your last name there.
I was going to say you did pretty well, actually, so thank you for attempting to read it. I'm Matt Semmelhack. I live here in Petaluma, run 2 businesses here that are focused on reuse and reducing emissions. I have 3 young kids that go to school at McNear. Frankly, I'm proud to live in a city that has a plan at all, so thank you for making that happen. I suspect we're probably in the top 1% of cities and towns in America that actually have a plan that has goals and targets. That said, to call falling short of the target by 2030 ambitious, I think is misleading and kind of disappointing. By the definition of the word, ambitious, falling short of the goal is really not ambitious. I think if we choose an actually ambitious target and fall short of it and we land at 0, that would be a better result. I realize that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, but I don't think having an ambitious goal that is short of the target is the right goal. Related to something that Anne said, I also think that showing the costs of doing this without showing the costs of not doing it is very misleading. I think that a lot of people will look at the plan and say, wow, that's expensive. This gentleman mentioned it. It looks like a lot of money. I would love to see by 2050 what happens if we don't hit these targets and what the cost in dollars is there. I realize that's tough to do, but I was a consultant once and I know that it's possible to put those numbers together. And I think that's really important for the general public, for anybody that's interested to understand both sides of that story. And as Anne mentioned, the kind of delta of what are we actually going to spend if we do nothing. That's pretty much it, but yeah, just enthusiastic and ready to get involved. So thank you for making that possible. Cheers.
Getting down to the last of the cards here. The next speaker I have is Steve DeLue, followed by Richard Braun.
I lost my voice waiting. We're strong. I represent a group called G Street Action that's strongly supportive of your recommendation in Appendix 5.6 that consideration be given through a formal ordinance of the City Council to ban gas-powered leaf blowers as a major step toward achieving carbon neutrality by 2020. Already we are part of the way there. The state has instituted a law which goes into effect next January that bans the sale of these devices. We want to go further and ban the use as well. And this is because the bill does nothing to curtail leaf blowers already being used by landscaping businesses. We're not asking the city to do anything out of the ordinary. After all, about 60 cities in California have some form of ban on gasoline-driven gardening tools already in place. What is to be gained from taking this step? A drastic reduction of carbon emissions and other pollutants in our air. For instance, Michael Shapiro says that it's astounding but true that gas leaf blowers, generators, and lawnmowers emit more air pollutants statewide than California's 14 million cars. That's stated in the magazine of the Sierra Club, Sierra Magazine. Also, the noise from these blowers is deafening, especially to the people who use them. Our view is that banning leaf blowers then is just low-hanging fruit. After all, the state of California has made available subsidies for the transition. Given that this and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that will bring us substantially closer to carbon neutrality by 2030 There is no reason not to take the step now and ban gas-powered leaf blowers. Thank you.
The next speaker is Richard Braun, followed by Andy Schrader.
All right, thank you. And once again, the display was great out there. You guys did the people who put it together did a magnificent job. My point is money. Money is necessary for everything. We can do, the city has a limited budget. People have limited budgets. So what exactly is going to be the most cost beneficial? Is it going to be responding to a worldwide problem of CO2 gas where we are a dot among billions of other people? Or is it preparation of the people here for what is coming? If the declaration by the city council that it is a climate emergency, then we have to assume that it is coming. And you have to prepare the city for what is coming. We can't do both. We can't take care of CO2 for the world and at the same time prepare for what is coming. There are all sorts of huge projects that will be necessary to accommodate this. So that is my major point there. And so what we need is a plan. And the health, safety, and economic well-being of the community is the number one priority. The city council was disturbed enough to point to have this the climate emergency, and it's still going to have an effect on us. So what are we going to do about it? That's my point. Thank you.
The last speaker card I have is for Barry Busowitz. Sorry about that, Andy Schrader.
You know, sometimes my mom would call me Barry when she was mad. Good evening, commissioners. Andy Schrader. I'm a local father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, which, if we get this right, can be our ambassadors to the year 2100. They'll be 84 and 86. As has been mentioned before, number one, I think we need more time than October 28th. This is an excellent document, very well done, and I think a robust local stakeholder process can make it even better. Number two, the actions of the city staff need to match the city's climate action plan and goals, which means a robust training process of every member of the city staff on how it impacts their specific job and what they need to do. Number three, I completely echo Ned's comments earlier that a climate smart, healthy soils effort is essential to this effort to draw down emissions. It's the one actual technology that works, the oldest technology on Earth. And lastly, I want to address the very first gentleman who spoke out of order in general public comment, who said that Petaluma's actions don't matter in the greater world. When the City Council of Petaluma approved a ban on permitting new gas stations, they were followed by every city in Sonoma County, including Sonoma County. And then the City Council of the second largest city in the United States, Los Angeles, followed suit and introduced the same legislation. The Guardian newspaper called Los Angeles the most influential city in the whole world. So when Los Angeles introduced its climate emergency, this is an example. So when Los Angeles introduced its climate emergency legislation, the city of Berkeley, then Richmond, and many of the Bay Area cities, including all 8 cities in the county of Sonoma, followed by the United Kingdom, New York City, and now it's up to 2,300 climate emergency declarations across the world. An organization called Safe Cities, which then Councilmember Delinda Fisher helped found, has taken up the responsibility to help these exact climate emergency cities work together, share best practices so they can get to carbon neutral as soon as possible without reinventing the wheel. so that we as a global community can work together towards dropping climate emissions as fast as humanly possible, which is what this emergency really calls for. I was on one of their calls today. They're still working hard at this. If Petaluma doesn't lead the way to carbon neutrality, nobody else is going to be motivated to do so. But if Petaluma actually does lead the way, which this excellent document does, other cities will follow, gratefully. The small agricultural communities throughout the country will see themselves in Petaluma, in Iowa, Nebraska, Indiana, Ohio, and they'll know that they
Thank
too
you, sir. That's
can
time.
create carbon neutral cities. What happens in Petaluma doesn't stay in Petaluma, it echoes.
Barry Busowitz.
Good evening. Thank you, commissioners and staff, and the public. I've been especially helped by the public tonight in the comments. I started reading the blueprint this afternoon, and after I spent an hour or something on it, I was pretty overwhelmed, and I didn't really want to come, and I didn't really have enough thinking to comment, but seeing the display boards and talking with the energized citizens and residents here has made a difference. And you're doing heavy lifting. You're doing hard work. And the public is also. And I appreciate that. And I'm especially moved to make a comment about the SMART train. I'm a proponent of active transportation, mostly by using it. And the SMART train is one of the several forms of active transportation I use. I've ridden it at the 5:16 in the morning. There were more than 4 people on the train. And I've ridden it other times a day, and there's more than there were at 5:16. So that's my personal direct testimony, anecdotal, I understand. But I believe it to be wholly factual. And I'm also especially appreciate the reminder, not only that this is a crisis, but that the cost of not doing it is our lives.
Thank you very much for the robust public comment. I think it was really appreciated and will go a long way to making this document better. I will say before we move into the commission member feedback portion of this, and I know there was a little bit of back and forth around the ad hoc topic as well. Before we do that, this isn't an action or a recommendation, and there's no staff report on it, but we did receive the most public feedback about extending the duration of the public comment period. And so what we can do as a commission is take a straw poll on how we feel on extending the public comment period. And if the members of the commission informally agree that that's a good idea, I think that direction will go some way in how the public comment period is treated after this meeting. I personally do think it should be extended, and if anyone else agrees, now would be the time to say that.
So my question is, this was released on October 2nd, I believe, and October 28th was given as the deadline. Is there a reason for that amount of time that to begin with?
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. Heather Hines, Special Project Manager with the Planning Division. So no, it was approximately a month. I did have an opportunity to talk to a couple of the members of the public who requested a longer period. We will work with that. I've already talked with Ramey Consultants too about pushing that out to allow some more time. So we'll work with the members that are trying to do more of the organizing and get some input from broader groups to get a sense of what that time frame would be. Obviously, we do want to keep moving along with this. And that was one of the reasons it kind of got pulled apart from the general plan when the general plan needed more time for the sea level rise and flood modeling. That was why we pulled the blueprint separate from that so that could move forward ahead. So we want to be moving forward, but we want to be moving forward with the community with good input. So we will work to define that. I would prefer not to kind of create a date extension on the, just on the fly. I'd rather have a chance to talk with the community members who are trying to do some of the organizing and come up with a revised timeline.
Great, thanks. I think message received. So before we move into the next item of the agenda, which is the staff report regarding the ad hoc, now would be the time, as discussed earlier, to provide high-level feedback on the document and in particular the sections that may be missing, as well as any thoughts on the general public comment related to this. So, Dave?
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chair. First of all, I wanted to thank our consultants. You put together a really comprehensive plan, and I've had a chance to review it. It's mind-bogglingly dense. And I wanted to thank city staff and the community for coming out. And it just, it's incredible because I get to work with cities throughout the area as part of my day job, and I can tell you we are light years ahead, especially for the size of our city, on what we're trying to accomplish here. I would encourage those who feel like we haven't received enough community input, or that we're not taking enough time to consider the fact that no plan's perfect. There's never going to be a plan that's going to accommodate everyone's their considerations. We need to move forward and start getting some of the actions done that are laid out in this plan. So I highly recommend that we move forward, and there will be opportunity to tweak as we implement the plan. Right, it's not a static thing. I also want to make sure that we acknowledge the huge contributions by Ned Orrit, who is a commissioner and provided invaluable knowledge on the consumption portion. So thank you, Ned. And I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Feedback?
I just echo those comments, and I appreciate the plan. It's a very comprehensive plan, and I'm looking forward to public comments and moving forward.
I also want to say thank you to Ramey and to our climate action manager and the city staff, planning department for putting together this plan. It really is taking a big step forward, building on the framework that we did as a commission and as a community. I think we set a pretty high bar with that, and I think this is a really good draft document and has a lot of substantive thought in there. I have a few comments that I'll say tonight. One thing that I was thinking about was that the city emissions are as 1% is a fairly small. I mean, it's a tiny amount of our overall emissions, and so my feeling is that there are a lot of cornerstone actions related to municipal emissions, and that we have to get a lot of leverage out of those actions. So I feel like the city needs to get, the schools in the sidecar, and we really need to have a business roundtable process, and that the efforts that the city makes, that it really becomes a part of the community experience, and that businesses and large nonprofits, for example, really can learn from what the city's doing. I feel like the transportation initiatives is the single biggest and most important area that we need to work on, and I feel like those initiatives should begin in the DAC areas first, in the disadvantaged communities. I think that's where we need to really walk our walk with equity considerations. It seems clear from comments tonight and reading this document that we're going to need some supplemental sources of funding that's perhaps a climate fund or something that's independent of the city budget. We're going to have to figure out how to do that as a community and not rely on the city to do that. A couple kind of smaller, one bigger comment is overall I'm uncomfortable with removing adaptation from this document, partly because it's such an integral part of our response to climate change, and I understand why it was done because we're trying to move forward more quickly on this. But I do feel like this document, the finished document, should have a list of recommendations that are in the general plan that are specifically climate related. Not just adaptation, but also because the land use portion is so big and such a key part of our transportation issues, that the why is missing in this part. I mean, when you talk about the land use, like why you need to get, more multifamily housing and single-family housing districts and things like that. I think we could motivate people more if they understood how all these things fit together, and that's not really spelled out here. Just a couple more thoughts. I do think it'd be helpful to understand the analysis behind the cornerstone actions and why they were selected. That's not entirely clear, like what didn't quite make the list. Just a couple smaller things. I think buildings, we need to talk about passive heating and cooling more, and also talk more about refrigerants and other climate forcing gases, and they're not as much on the radar, but have a big short-term impact, because there is kind of an argument to be made that, acting faster on climate forcing gases is what we need to be doing right now, and so I think helping us sort which of the cornerstone actions we work on first, and the theory, we did that whole theory of change exercise, but I think that's kind of where we are now, is how do we sort which priorities go first? So understanding a little more of the cornerstone actions, and then the piece about climate forcing gases and how they're playing out right now, because it does seem like climate change is accelerating, and perhaps that's why. Thank you.
Commissioner Member Abshley?
I will echo the gratitude for the group of people that put this together. I will admit that there was a part in here that I started tearing up because I was so proud to be part of Petaluma. And that part is the city's goal is to work towards carbon neutrality by 2030. With this, the city is pursuing the what does it take scenario, which made me so happy. The city is committed to working towards carbon neutrality and will leverage new opportunities to reach even deeper reductions. Just very inspired and happy to see how much work was put into this. But as far as comments go, actually I'll start with this comment, which is the developing that cost-benefit analysis for making these changes, like we were talking about with the cars, and I would say with buildings and lots of other things. There's the sort of price tag, but then there's also the cost, and so that I think that would be really valuable for myself to see, but then also for the community to see and create buy-in, and I think that's why meetings like this are so important. Everybody's input is bringing this to the forefront. I was asked by a contractor to request that the city consider extending work hours to earlier in the morning, because right now contractors can't start to working until 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock on weekends. And as the afternoons get hotter, you can imagine workers being on the roof and how hot that, it's 20 degrees hotter on a roof than it is on the ground. And that is also an equity issue. So if we extended working hours till like 7 a.m., and I know that there's a noise issue there, but there's also, it's a noise issue versus a human, health issue. The other thing, I saw a few mentions of it, but I felt like there could be more consideration for building materials that not only have low embodied carbon, but also contribute to a circular economy. Reuse, regeneration of material products. There was a mention of, what is the phrase? The phrase is escaping me now, but basically there were a bunch of mentions of tenants, with equity and everything like that, but there wasn't a whole lot of solutions for how to incentivize landlords to be making some of these changes. I actually searched the word landlord and there wasn't a single mention. So there was, I remember a piece of that talked about that. The phrase is escaping me. There was a gentleman this evening that talked about accessibility of meetings for Spanish language, this is being recorded. I guess it's going to be posted online. But I just want to reiterate, we talked about this like another couple months ago, that having these meetings online is actually also an equity issue. Some people are, it's difficult for them to get out, and some people who are working 2 jobs, it's easier for them to be making dinner while they're listening to a meeting like this, or even able to participate. As far as community engagement, I think this is maybe part of the ad hoc committee, but I have a lot of ideas about, highlighting local businesses, maybe bringing in the schools, having there be a class at one of the high schools to do a weekly thing for the Argus Courier about, highlighting people that are doing cool things. So these are all probably things for like more detail oriented, but I think community engagement is sort of put in, sort of glossed over, but it's in there a lot, but it's could be fleshed out a little bit more. I'd like to reiterate that somebody talked about water needing to be more, I think it was Trayton talked about water needing to be more central to the discussion of the future. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I guess I'm up. A lot of great comments from my fellow commissioners. Thanks for doing the heavy lifting, just leaving me with a few comments. And also thanks to staff and consultants for having boiled down a heck of a lot of content into a relatively concise and yet still overwhelming document. I think one of the top things that jumped out at me upon reading this today was, as Amy pointed out, yes, we're doing the, what's it called again? The all of the above. What's the what it takes? Sorry, I'm delirious. Been reading this thing way too long today. The what does it take scenario, and yet at the same time, there's some equivocal comments in the document that say, well, yeah, we don't really think this is likely, but we're going to try. I want to see us really, truly commit. I think that's a very important thing for us to do, because nobody really overachieves a goal. If anything, we fall short of goals, right? So let's set the bar where we really, really, really think it needs to be, and not do any of this like, well, we might do 97% if we are, turn into supermen and superwomen. Like, no, we need to say we're really going to do this, or we absolutely will not. I think that's hugely important. I also think a couple of comments others have made that I want to underscore. I think Nina Zito's point about we need to look at reductive strategies and not just build more, do more strategies, because those all involve carbon expenditures. So I think it's really important to think about what we don't need to do, or what we need to not do, right? Like build more stuff. I think, yes, we need more housing, but who needs housing? The people at the very, very bottom end of the socioeconomic spectrum need housing. Others, not so much. I also agree that having Spanish language as a regular thing is hugely important if we are sincere in all of our equity rhetoric. I also really appreciated some of the graphics. I like the shades of green on the GHG reduction potential and the shades of red in relative cost. I would love to see that go a couple of steps farther and see, well, how do those overlay? Where do we have high impact and low cost, for example? But I think there are also some criteria that we're missing. For example, as Anne and others have very astutely pointed out, the cost of not doing this stuff is pretty staggering. And that is sort of the overriding consideration. That's why we're here. So we need to really understand that. And to that point, I think speed of delivery is hugely important. The one single comment I made more often than any other in this document was sooner. And I do think there are actually a lot of relatively easy, quick wins. Some things that, in fact, are underway or are waiting in the wings and that can really be addressed much more quickly if we have the political will to devote the capital and staffing to that, which of course go together. And also another criterion that I think is really important is social impact. You know, things that are visible and show progress and demonstrate the types of quality of life improvements that Natasha mentioned can really mobilize people to engage in a way that no number of reports or presentations or public events can do. If we can do some of the tactical urbanism things and have people go, wow, my street is really a lot safer, calmer, quieter now, and I actually feel my blood pressure go down. That's a win that you can, carry a lot of other stuff on. So I think we need to be looking at those, again, speed of delivery and social impact as being criteria in what we do and when we do it as being equally important to some of the criteria that have been discussed. That's it for tonight.
Thank you, Commission Member Edminster. You did steal my comment on the 4-box matrix about the low cost, high impact. So certainly appreciate it, as well as adding some more criteria to that. I do think some of the aspects of prioritization, would be well served by the commission to better prioritize which of the 22 or 23 or 25 or whatever. If there's a discussion at the next meeting regarding prioritization, I think that would serve the community well. I do have a couple quick comments and then 2 sort of more in-depth discussion points. So the first somewhat related to the prioritization, but the sheets out here on the walls did a good job of noting with the stars and the icons what was a cornerstone action and what was a city priority. I didn't see that in the document as clearly, and so would be good to just get that throughout the document. As well as in the presentation, there was the summary of action plans table, and that table could definitely go into the document. And then the related comment on that, I personally think there should be one cornerstone action per sector. Just, we only have clean energy. We could obviously do many clean energy cornerstone actions relatively quickly with, low cost, high speed, and high impact. And then water. This is a broader, probably more in-depth conversation about water, but the water chapter really just talks about the resource of water and not necessarily our water system. And I would like to see more documentation around our water treatment facility specifically. The city has moved forward with a massive 5 megawatt floating solar project there. That's going to be one of the nicest, biggest floating solar projects in the country when that comes online. And that's only one pond of, I think we have 5 or 6 more ponds there to do. And so that's the first piece on the water part of it. The second piece is the biogas facility that's there. The document needs to speak to the biogas facility, and I'll give a little bit of analogy here, not to get too long-winded, but at the last city council meeting, there was an item on the consent calendar for an excavator purchase. That purchase ultimately went through, even though there are electric alternatives. The point I'm making is that in the council comment and in the staff comment, there was confusion between renewable diesel and biogas. And the city council said, why can't we get an excavator that runs on the biodiesel from our water treatment plant? Okay, and so the water treatment plant produces biogas. That biogas is intended to power Recology's fleet. I don't know the status of that contract. I don't know if that contract is in the best interest of the city relative to all the incentives available for the production of biogas. I also don't know the production or status of that facility. But that is one of the largest capital investment that the city has made in recent history, is that facility. So that facility needs to be brought online. It needs to be cranking out biogas so that Recology's fleet is powered and some of our larger heavy-duty city fleet vehicles are powered. The second thing that's not really into the document is the city's heavy vehicles fleet. And that's the toughest things to reduce, is your heavy vehicles, right? But we need to at least speak to that in the document. What is our plan for our heavy duty vehicle fleet? And the last point I'll make on this topic is the renewable diesel piece. So the reason the excavator purchase moved forward is because the city is apparently already purchasing renewable diesel. This is something that we talked about at the commission, and it was a bit of a surprise to me. I was under the understanding that we would need to sign some sign of contract for that, but apparently that is already done, and the city's already transitioned to renewable diesel, which is a huge win and something that should be included in the blueprint if true, and if not true, certainly some miscommunication occurred at the last city council meeting. So to just put a pin on this topic, it's that the document should speak to the city's biogas facility, our heavy-duty vehicle fleet, and our renewable diesel purchasing plan. The last quick comments I'll make related to the public comments. The one from Maddie Cloud at Petaluma City Schools on working specifically with the schools as a component of the transportation demand management. That seems like very low-hanging fruit and can easily be tucked into that section, just another couple lines. You know, there's the TDM chapter. How do we do transportation demand management? Let's have a specific goal and focus for the schools. So I think that's an easy one. As well as the comment on the gas-powered leaf blowers. I was happy to see that, having, personally myself spoken for the city council for years on that topic. There is, again, low-hanging fruit there, and I personally think that should be extended to all off-road equipment, right? So what he mentioned in his comment is that the state is working on this. They have banned this type of equipment, the sale of it, and so we should go beyond leaf blowers. The state uses the acronym SOAR, Small Off-Road Equipment. And so we should have a ban on small off-road equipment at some point by 2030. The last comment I'll make, and not to go grandstanding, but, the parking management strategy is near and dear to my heart. So it was good to see one person speak about the potential cost of non-free parking, because that was only one person in a relatively full room, right? And this is a democracy, and as long as we have less than 1% of the public speaking out about this parking management strategy, then that is a win. But we need to message and communicate this very clearly, because the way it's written in the document is a little bit scary. We are going to put costs on downtown parking so it is inconvenient for people, so they take alternative modes of transit. And so that messaging should be softened and made more approachable to people, right? And so we need a parking management strategy. There are plenty of ways to do parking management strategy that don't involve parking meters, that don't involve paying for parking every time you go downtown. Just look at Mill Valley. Mill Valley's RSVP program. Every resident that pays into that program gets to park downtown Mill Valley for free and go shopping. And the people that don't live in Mill Valley pay, right? And so that type of policy is very popular, having the outsiders pay for benefits that go to the local residents, right? And so the more we can message that the people that want to visit our beautiful downtown, our beautiful tourists, they can pay our transit taxes and they can pay our parking fees. And, this is the little speech I'll make. This is a letter we have from the Attorney General's Office of Governor Brown from January 3, 2008, and it's regarding the draft EIR for the general plan, back to Pamela Tuft when she was heading this. And it says right here, the draft general plan requires the city to study the feasibility of a citywide transportation demand management program, which includes parking management funded by development fees. And so that was back in 2008. And so we've been talking about this parking thing and this transportation demand management thing for a very long time. And so we need to accelerate that. And I personally will take it upon myself to make sure that it gets implemented. And so I don't need to be on my high horse about this, but the impact of free parking is a huge underestimated climate impact. The high cost of free parking. You know, all the shoepistas out there, they'll know what I'm talking about. But the thing is, we need to get the messaging right for this. And the document is one way to do that, and the public comment is another way to do that. And so we just need to accelerate this, because people driving around parking for free is no longer an option. So, having said all that, I think there's a last couple items on our agenda for this evening. Again, thank the public and the consultants and staff and everyone for this. The next agenda item is the discussion of an ad hoc. So, Rihanna, I don't know if you want to make any comments about this item.
So staff is recommending that the Climate Action Commission create an ad hoc to do a deep dive into the document, draft recommendations to bring back to the full commission in November for a vote, and a discussion and a vote. And once a conclusion has been reached, those recommendations will be moved forward to Ramey to incorporate into a final document, to convene with staff and then decide what needs to be incorporated into a final document.
Okay, and this was clarified in the staff report. So this body has 9 members. One of the members is a city council member. And so that means that quorum is 4 and a majority is 4. So less than, yeah.
Sorry, to clarify, the council liaison is not a full part of the Climate Action Commission, so a quorum is 3. It's not to exceed 4. So we will need to have 3 members in the ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to volunteer. This is my day job, so it's near and dear to my heart, and I also have considerable expertise in the subject matter.
We need 2 more volunteers.
Yeah, I'd like to volunteer.
I'll do it.
I nominate you, Ben, but I'll be happy to join if not.
Okay, it looks like we have 3 volunteers. Rihanna, do we need to take a formal vote on this?
The creation of ad hocs is an informal action, so we don't need to take a formal vote. The 3 volunteers I will contact next week, and we'll set up a meeting to discuss the details further.
Okay, great. Couple other items on our agenda. I did neglect to go over the approval of minutes. So that was an earlier agenda item that I missed. Apologies for that. So the approval of the minutes is done by acclamation. So if anyone has any changes to the minutes, now would be the time to make those comments. Okay. The minutes are deemed approved. The final 2 items we have are committee member comment followed by staff comment. So
Actually, we have discussion of the date and time for the November meeting.
Oh, okay.
Because the original November meeting falls on a city-observed holiday. So we will need to move that date and time. And after reviewing the city chamber's calendar, the only available date is the Wednesday before, which would fall on November 8th. The timing is open and flexible.
I like the 8th. I personally think earlier in the day was better if this is such an important document and we are trying to finish it by the end of the year. You know, if that's what is the earliest we could meet, 4 p.m., 5
I
p.m.?
think 4 p.m. I can try to reserve the room for 4 p.m. if that's the consensus.
Let's,
Can everybody come at 4?
I'll actually be out of town. I'm very sorry.
4 o'clock on the 8th works for me.
okay, 1, 2, 3. We need a 4th committee member to hold a meeting.
No.
Okay. The next meeting, 4 p.m. on the 8th, assuming we can coordinate that time. And if not, you know, I'm assuming later will work well for everyone.
I will send out notifications once I confirm.
Okay, thanks. And then I guess I'll go left to right this time in terms of committee member comments. No? Okay. No, I guess I'll make one comment, and this is for those members of the public still sitting there. So the RCPA countywide meeting, Pete, I believe you are on this committee, so it does have a vacancy for Sonoma County. So there's 2, generally, each supervisor district gets 2. And so I encourage more participation in those meetings, our CPA meetings. That is one potential funding mechanism for this climate blueprint. You know, the RCPA was unsuccessful in that tax measure. That doesn't mean they've given up, but I do encourage people to come. That meeting, I think, is this Friday. I took a look at the agenda. It was, you know, of note, and I think at least in terms of this commission trying to propagate more climate action, we should spread the word and get another seat on District 2 for that body and get more participation there. The last thing I'll say for my comment is the County of Sonoma is going through a very similar process as the City of Petaluma, and I believe their draft climate actions, I don't know what they are calling them, but those are going to be due out in November as well. And so November will be a very busy month for actual climate actions, but I encourage everyone to not only read the updated blueprint for Petaluma, but also read the County of Sonoma plan, because their actions and their funding mechanisms need to align with ours. Does anyone else? Committee member comment? Okay. Staff comment?
The only comment I would like to make is to clarify the adoption of renewable diesel usage by the city fleet. The fire department and transit departments use the school district facilities for their fueling services, and that transitioned to renewable diesel in 2018. Earlier this year, the city entered into a joint fueling services request for proposals with the county and the city of Santa Rosa. We recently received notification of the lowest bidder for that request for proposals, and there's documentation that staff is working on to bring that contract forward to city council for review and hopeful approval. So part of the fleet has transitioned, and the other part is pending city council approval of the contract.
Great, thanks. With that, this meeting